Stephen A. Smith, he says, racism, you all are making a big deal about it, not that big a deal. And you don't need less police, you need more police. Here it is.
Do you worry about racism if he ran for president?
No. I know it exists. I know that you can't escape it, but I do not believe it is as prevalent as some on the left would like us to believe. I do believe a vast majority of Americans judge you on the content of your individual character rather than the color of your skin. I think a lot of people in America, especially in this day and age, now more so than ever before, it's not about race. It's about the fact that they don't give a damn about it because they got their own problems. That's entirely different than believing they are superior to you and they want to hold you back from ascending. That's not what's going on to the degree that it was decades ago. What's going on now is that we have more white Americans and others suffering and worried about the state of our nation. And because they're concerned about that, that's where their worries lie.
Well, that bank account talking, ain't it? Stephen A., I got something for you, sir. But before I go to it, he also said we need more cops on the street. Here it is.
Make no mistake about it. We wouldn't have a border crisis under my watch. Hell no. We wouldn't have this crime that exists in the streets of New York. You wouldn't hear about me saying defund the police. We ain't defunding any police. I'm calling 911 when there's a problem. I know you're calling 911 when there's a problem. I'll be damned if I'm going to have less police officers out there. There's going to be more. That's me. I would focus on a flourishing economy and making sure we did everything we could, because I believe when you have something to lose, you know how to behave. When you have something to lose, you know how to behave. If you have nothing, you have nothing to lose. And as a result, you're willing to tear down anything, even if it's America.
Sir, this is not a sports play. Put him up full mass. All this simple ass logic, ABC elementary, back and forth. Let me be very clear with you, sir. Number one, the issue of racism is not about personal racism. It is about the entrenched racism that is institutional. That's the racism we're talking about. I cannot stop, and nor do I want to stop a bigot from talking about racism during their dinner time in their home. That is their prerogative. That is not the racism we are referring to. We are referring to the institutional racism, because the very question to you, Stephen A., about do you worry about race came from a white reporter due to his own institutional racism. Because if a white male was there who happened to be connected to the Republican Party, that question wouldn't be, sir, are you concerned about white racist? No, they don't get that question, because it is not entrenched or institutional in them. Racism is not about racism. It is about the ism, sir. Not so much about the race. What is the ism? The ism is the separation. The ism is the part that says we judge the race. That's the part, the social construct inside of the minds of individuals who believe that the epidermis or the color of your skin makes you inferior is the issue. That collective bias has led to structural discrimination. For example, Donald Trump decides to gut the Department of Education. The Department of Education happens to be the only federal agency where black folk are overrepresented. These are highly educated black men and women, in particular women. Gut the Department of Education, creating a massive job loss crisis in the black community of those who decided to engage in significant educational attainment. For what reason? Why did they engage in educational attainment? In order to have job security. And Trump took that away with gutting that office. Black people are making less under this administration. Household median income has dropped under this administration. Home ownership has dropped under this administration for black folk. And you don't think structural racism is part of that. We're not talking about your personal belief. We're talking about the statistics, the data that you can reverse engineer in order to find the genesis of it. Second, put this picture back up, Jordan. When you said, sir, that when something happens, you're going to call 911. Who doesn't call 911 if they need 911? But 911 has also created worse outcomes than if they never called 911 in the first place. 911 is not about policing. The issue, sir, and I really do hope that as you journey, you start reading and you start being open to the reality that you don't know what the hell you're talking about because you're leading people to hell with this ideology. Policing isn't about public safety. Public safety is about public safety. Policing responds when public safety hasn't happened. Police respond when public safety hasn't happened. The goal, sir, is public safety. There are many ways to get to the space of public safety without policing. As a matter of fact, if your county or city or state has to hire more police, they're telling you they're failing. Because that means they have not addressed the issues of public safety. I would prefer to have a robust mentoring program for young at-risk youth between the ages of 12 to 17 that would stop the potential of criminality rather than putting all of my money into reacting to criminality at the age of 18. See, that's called a public safety model. I would prefer a model that actually engages in rehabilitation, second chance opportunities, education. The greatest deterrent to recidivism is if a person learns something while they are incarcerated. That can be a skill, a trade, that can be a college degree. It is, by statistics, the greatest deterrent to any crime in the future is if you train that individual to make money. And third, I will say this, sir. You're smarter than that, Stephen A. You're smarter than this ABC ideology. Policing has never solved a socioeconomic issue. You have made the argument that crime is related to economics. When have police ever been able to arrest themselves out of socioeconomic dysfunction? Never. Because if you could arrest yourself out of socioeconomic dysfunction, Chicago would be the richest city in the United States of America. New York will be the most crime-free and richest progressive place on the planet Earth. You cannot hire more cops to solve a socioeconomic dysfunction. All right, that's my 2 cents, sir. So Smith took issue with Biden's border policy. Quote, the borders needed to be closed. Doesn't quite work like that. Trump was right to do that, he said, but only because Biden opened them. Had Biden followed Barack Obama's method and his plan of what he did in deporting even more people than Trump did in his first term, you wouldn't hear me saying that, end quote, Smith said. Another quote, but when you let anywhere from 12 to 15 million people cross the border, that's a talking point, by the way. That's not a confirmed number. 12 to 15 million people across the border illegally, swearing in our face, spitting in our face while and telling us it's raining, figuratively speaking, by telling us there was no border crisis when clearly there was. Emergency efforts were necessary, end quote. And put his picture back up. What makes it a border crisis? What makes it a border crisis? What happened to the caravan? What happened to the gangsters? You do know they ship cocaine on boats and planes, sir. What made it a border crisis? Undocumented immigrants are the least likely demographic in America to offend criminally. That is a fact. What made it a border crisis? Because somebody said it? Because of the numbers that they're telling you that are unconfirmed? What made it a border crisis? The caravans of gangsters and child predators? No. That's in the White House, sir. What made it a border crisis? Is it financial? Because according to all financial reports, undocumented labor in the United States of America leads to an economic plus. not an economic negative. What made it a border crisis? All right. Quote, now, he says, do I like what I'm seeing in the streets of America in terms of ICE grabbing people up, snatching people off the streets, detaining folks? No, I do not. Smith said, do I like them saying, hey, we're going after the criminals, and come to find out your definition of criminals is anybody who crossed the border illegally or opposed to the impression you gave us that there were real bona fide criminals that was doing harm to American citizens. No, I don't like that either. Now, put his picture back up. I want you to understand the difference in how he answered that question and how he went in on everything else. So when it came to policies that adversely stood against Trump, his response is, do I like this? No. Did I want this? No. Did I prefer this? No. But when it comes to black folk, racism, and everything else, he had an exacting design for his point of view. Exacting. But when it came to Trump, well, do I like what Trump is doing? No. Starting to sound like MAGA, sir. You're starting to sound like MAGA. Because that's the same contextualization they typically utilize when it comes to Trump and his cronies crossing a line, crossing another line, and now crossing this line. Quote, I will confess to you, I'm giving strong consideration to being on that debate stage for 2027, Smith told Costa. Quote, I've got this year coming up, 2026, to think about it, to study, and to know the issues. And sir, I highly recommend you do some more studying. Senator, thoughts here?
Doc, you took the words right out of my mouth. I want him to study quick. He talks too much to be this wrong.
Yeah.
So he definitely has to study. And for any American, but especially a black man, not to understand the difference between individual bigotry and discrimination compared to institutional or systemic racism, it's quite stunning that he has reached this far in his career and he doesn't understand the global impact and nature of systemic or also called institutional racism in the United States of America. And if we start looking at the diaspora, I mean, within the diaspora, the entire diaspora where Black people are, has been impacted by white supremacy, racism that impacts one's ability. We're not talking about individual. So Dr. Richey, you are absolutely right. If somebody wants to be a bigot at their kitchen table, they can be a bigot at the kitchen table. But when a group of bigots control whether or not you can bank somewhere, whether or not you can eat at a restaurant, whether or not you can keep your job, whether or not your economic status hits a ceiling, it never can go above that. Whether or not there's generational poverty, not one or two people who got it wrong, but just generationally, there's a cycle. Where you go to school, do you pay taxes in a neighborhood, schools you can't go to? Can you go into a hospital? That is systemic and institutional racism that this man is not grasping. And you know what? His answer is really not much different than that of Vice President Harris. She was asked, it was a few years ago, Doc, it was after one of the State of the Union, she was asked, was there racism still in the country? And she said no. I mean, and also Senator Tim Scott said the same thing. I was gobsmacked. But that kind of mentality, who are you catering to, sir? Just tell the truth. And he did not list one material policy that he would implement other than increasing the police that would really change the material conditions of the people in this country, like universal health care or increasing the federal minimum wage. And you are absolutely right, Dr. Richey. People need to understand this. Police respond to symptoms. It is not the job of law enforcement to deal with social economic crises or problems or failings. By the time you calling the police in, 9 times out of 10, unless it is a crime in action, they responded to something that already happened.
That's right.
And it
That's
is a failure. So please, Stephen A. Smith, stop getting high off your own supply. Okay. You do need to study before you get on anybody's stage to try to debate policy and whether or not you're going to become president of the United States of America. He in it for the theater at this point, Doc. That's what I'm thinking. He think he gonna yell his way like he do on his shows. He gonna yell his way on the stage. That's what he thinks he's gonna do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we live in an era where that is possible. He can yell his way on the stage, and that's why I believe it's up to us to continue to give our brother light, which is truth and good information, so that he can at least have an opportunity to grow, to expand into the role as he journeys, hopefully.